Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the Community Food Project's Evaluation webinar. I'm Kristen Aldrich with New Entry Sustainable Farming Project, and we will be joined by Rebecca Deming, who will be delivering the content of this webinar to talk about the evaluation component of your CFP proposal. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So first off, just want to give a quick orientation to the WebEx program. So you have a couple of audio options for how to connect to this webinar. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, you can always try a different audio option in terms of connecting. Feel free to send me a message through the chat box, which we've highlighted here as well. Or send me an email if you're having any trouble joining. And then throughout the presentation, we'll have a couple of chances for Q&A throughout and also have some time at the end to answer questions. But feel free to send any questions through the chat box. All of the attendees are muted when they join the webinar, just to avoid any kind of audio interference with the presentation. So feel free to send any questions through that chat feature. And so for a quick overview of the agenda, I'm going to do a very brief overview of New Entry and our CFP Technical Assistance grant project that we have. Then Rebecca, as I mentioned, will deliver the content of this webinar, talking about evaluation and that component of your CFP proposal, and time for Q&A. And in following up with this webinar, we'll send an email to everyone who had registered with a link to a survey to evaluate the webinar, also the recorded webinar and the presentation slides, and links to other resources that will be of interest. So briefly, New Entry Sustainable Farming Project started in 1998 here in Massachusetts as a project of Tufts University. We have been and currently continue on the groundwork in Massachusetts with a farmer training program and food access initiatives. We work with beginning farmers who are interested in starting a business and have a business planning course, as well as an incubator farm site for folks to apply what they are interested in developing as a new farmer. Work on the national team includes supporting other food systems organizations across the country, including other incubator farm programs. Some of you might be familiar with the National Incubator Farm Training Initiative, or NIFTI, which focuses on different incubator farming programs across the country, but we also provide support such as this for a couple of specific USDA grant programs, including the Community Food Projects grant program. So we're able to provide training and technical assistance to folks that are interested in applying to the CFP grant program, as well as offering assistance to grantees who have been awarded a CFP grant. So that comes in the form of one-on-one assistance that we can provide to people who are in the proposal process, plus webinars like this to help with different aspects of the proposal, and also support for folks, as I mentioned, who have been awarded a grant. And I'll go ahead and turn it over now to Rebecca Deming with the Center for Environmental Farming Systems at North Carolina State University, who will be talking a bit more about your CFP proposal and the evaluation component.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kristen. Appreciate it. So there are lots of kind of straight-up evaluation resources out there. New Entry website has a number of excellent resources. There's a lot on the web and on YouTube. So I thought I'd take a little bit of a different tack today and talk more about evaluation as assessment, in the sense that you, as the writer of the CFP proposal, you're creating a data-backed persuasive essay for a set of reviewers. who are assessing your overall grant proposal. So what that means is that we're going to talk about the logic model and particulars of evaluation, but we're also, over the next half hour, so we want to talk about evaluation focused on this assessment thinking and evidence that should be threaded throughout your overall proposal. So how to strategically craft your overall proposal to make sure that each section of your narrative, not just that evaluation section, is providing evidence of the competence of your organization and your partners to work with community members, identify needs and assets, clearly articulate an actionable plan, and execute a set of activities that addresses identified needs. So that's how we're going to approach it today. So our first, fortunately for us, hold on a second. Fortunately for us, USDA doesn't leave it up to chance of what they're looking for. It's clearly spelled out. It's not a mystery what USDA is seeking in the CFP project. They're explicitly stating what your proposed project should do, what areas it should address. So that means that those areas have to be reflected in your proposal. And reflected means more than just saying we are going to meet the food needs of low-income people, we're going to increase self-reliance. You've got to provide evidence that your project does that. So being very explicit, as specific as possible with that evidence. So let's talk about, oh, here we go. Well, USDA also provides even more detailed information on what they're looking for in the project. So this list is out of the RFP, and the list is provided to develop links between two or more sectors of the food system, connect for-profits and nonprofits. The point is not that your proposal necessarily hits all of these, but you want your proposed project to address several of them, or it's simply not going to be funded. So this is the kind of thing that you keep, that you print out and you put next to your computer as you're working on your project proposal, referring back and forth to make sure that you're hitting these things. It's very ineffective for you to write in general terms about how you're going to address all of these with your project. It's very effective if you present a compelling case that you can do 3 of these things, providing a lot of specific detail. So again, your task is to supply evidence that your project is doing these things. So let's talk about the narrative section by section. I'll talk about A and B for maybe 5 minutes or so, then we'll go and hit C through F specifically. Let's talk about strategy and evidence for these first 2 sections. So the first 2 sections of the proposal ask you to explain the communities and organizations involved in the project and their specific needs. That means you need to provide evidence that the area and the low-income population has significant food and security needs. All that is articulated in the RFP. So what evidence would you use? You need to show with census, other secondary data of the needs of that community, a specific community, an 8-block area, a 3-municipality area. Be as explicit as possible about what constitutes that community using census data, secondary data, but here is also a really good opportunity for you to evidence that the lead organization or other organizations that are partners with you have gathered some primary information from the communities of interest. So you wouldn't just say something like, we talked with residents to identify their needs. That's not specific enough. You couldn't leave it at that. You'd want to specifically explain how you talk with them. So this could be like a series of community meetings that your organization held, or it could be meeting with the advisory groups of your partner organizations over a 1-year period. So for example, something that's specific enough to be considered evidence would be, quote unquote, we held 4 community meetings over a 1-year period with a core group of 10 community members. And from these meetings, we devised a list of community needs and assets related to food. What you'd want to do is be very detailed about that, put that steady in the appendix, and then provide some highlights here in the narrative. That would be a way that you can signal your competency and what you have done to prepare for the work that you're going to outline in this proposal. And as stated in the CFP, the most important thing is that USDA is expecting that you've done this pre-work with the community. Most relevant is an explanation of why the applicant and its partners selected the activities proposed in the application. So you're not planning on helicoptering into a community. You've worked with the community to identify the needs, the assets, and strategies to make use of those assets and to address the needs. Again, provide evidence of that. Ideally, you have a full report that you've attached as an appendix, and you have highlights of this in sections A and B of the narrative. Right, so that pretty much covers A and B. And I have more kind of a tip sheet at the end that tells you, that just gives her my own experience reviewing projects, reviewing grants, what are good things to have in both these sections A and B. But I'm going to save those till the end just to make sure that we can get through C through F. Kristen, if there's anything in the chat box, just let me know. So let's assume that you've provided some good evidence of the community need in sections 1 and 2, that's section A and B. You have provided evidence that the lead and partner organizations have the skills and experiences and strong community networks to tackle the needs that you've identified, and that you're going to work with the community to address those needs and build on community assets. So now you've got to articulate exactly what you're going to do. So you have your partners, you've assessed what the need is, you have a general idea of what you would like to do. Now you've got to walk the reader through an understanding of what your plans are. What you're planning, what are you going to do, who is going to be doing it specifically, what do you expect will result specifically. You want to explain it clearly and logically so that the funder, the reviewer, has confidence that you can do the work. Basically that you know what you're talking about. So we start with our friend, the logic model. So the logic model is your friend, and that is the place to start. I don't suggest writing up your plan before you can articulate it in the logic model. But there's no single right way to do it. You could have one that looks like this. You could have one that looks like this, even more complicated. I start with something like this. And I keep this little mantra kind of reminding myself of the relationship between inputs, activities, outcomes, and goals. By using the inputs, we do activities that lead to outcomes, which provide evidence we have met our goals. Because sometimes, and we're going to talk for a few minutes about this, people often get activities and outcomes and goals kind of switched around, and they'll talk about them in different ways. Let's just, I would say when you're starting out to construct your logic model, do it just with these 3 columns: inputs, activities, and outcomes, knowing that you need to provide some measurements of the activities, not every single activity, and some measurements of the outcomes, things that you expect to happen because you've done these activities. All right, your package should fit together nicely. So the partners and the lead partner and let's say the lead organization and the other partners and the assets, those are the inputs that were in section A, section B, and section B that meet the, those are the leads and the assets, those are the inputs that were in section B that meet the needs of the community that you defined in section A. All right, and that by striving to meet these goals, then we'll know that we have reached goals by seeing some outcomes. So inputs are applied to these activities in a logical way to meet the outcomes. You don't want to have any contradictions in your logic model. You don't want to have anything contradicting your narrative to your logic model. So you want to make sure if you have different people working on different parts, you want to make sure that they reflect each other. That's a major red flag if a reviewer sees that there's conflicting information there. Even if it's something small, it signals that not enough time was spent on thinking through the proposal. You also don't want to have any acronyms in the logic model. Your logic model should stand alone, so that very often a reviewer might look at the abstract, kind of page through the proposal, and then go straight to the logic model to get kind of an idea of what they're going to read about. So it should be able to stand alone. This is a nice kind of a logic model train. It's from the Kellogg Foundation's Logic Model Development Guide. And if you wanted to do a little reading, to kind of ground yourself, I would say look at this resource and also look at the new entry evaluation information that they have online. This will just give you a little more background on how to fit these things together. Even more simplified, this is something I made up, for someone who's visual, to show how sometimes these things can overlap. Goals can seem to overlap with objectives. Activities and outputs kind of overlap. Outputs and outcomes can kind of overlap. So there's 3 points that I wanted to make here. One is that your goals and objectives, you could have one large goal, one kind of general goal, and you have 3 more specific objectives underneath, or you could have one fairly specific goal. So usually, you'll see both within a CFP proposal. It's not something to get too hung up about. It's really just a way to break it down for the reviewer to understand what are you actually trying to achieve. So you could break down, you could have one goal with 3 objectives and then 2 activities per objective, or you could just have one goal and 6 activities to reach that goal. So it's not something to get too hung up on. You don't necessarily have to have separate goals and objectives as long as it's very clear. Sometimes a CFP will have 3 goals, won't even mention objectives. So it's not something to get too hung up about. Just make it clear what exactly are you trying to do with your project? What do you think is going to be, what is the eventual end, what do you want to see come out of the project? Your outputs are evidences of activity. So an output would be something more tangible. So let's say creation of a visual recipe card for low literacy audiences. So the tangible output there is implicit in an activity that you are engaged in. So if you have one of your activities is create visual recipe cards, you may not need to also indicate that the output is recipe cards. So again, you could have a column in your logic model that is activities, things you're going to do, things you're going to be, partners are going to be engaged in, and then outputs, things that are going to be created. But in a way, the output column may not be absolutely necessary. It may be more confusing to have it in there. So activities, the things you are doing, the actions you are taking are not the outcomes. And this is probably the biggest error that I've seen when people are constructing logic models. Activities result in outcomes. These are the things that you are doing so that you generate a positive outcome, so that people are eating more servings of fruits and vegetables, so that individuals are using your recipe cards to cook healthy meals for their families. So the outcomes show that you've made progress in reaching your goals because you've done these activities. So activities are not outcomes. Activities are not goals. Activities are not objectives. Buying a delivery truck is not an outcome. Buying a delivery truck is not a goal. Buying a delivery truck is an activity that you engage in to reach an outcome, to reach a goal. All right, a couple of things about the logic model is that it needs to make sense. That's the most important thing. If it's something that you can give to someone they can understand without having to be briefed on it, it just makes logical sense. One thing fits with the next thing, so that if you just have these 3 columns, inputs, activities, and outcomes, those things should fit together. It needs to make sense on its own. Beware of acronyms. Don't have anything that contradicts the narrative. It should be providing kind of the one-page thing that someone could look at to understand what your project is about. And you need to have some quantified specifics. So not everything that you have in a logic model does it need to have a measure. Not every activity has to have a measure associated. Not every outcome has to have a measure associated with it. But you need to have some. because that's indicating that you're going to be able, that's indicating your competency of your organization to carry this project out. All right, so let's kind of summarize in these narrative sections. Strong proposals make a convincing case that the community needs are logically connected to the goals and outcomes, and the goals are logically connected to the activities. So you don't want to have the community need that was articulated in the first couple of sections of the project. It shouldn't be distant from how you've decided to solve those needs, to address those needs. It should fit very logically. It should be like, oh, it perfectly makes sense that this would be the set of activities that this potential grantee wants to engage in to address those needs. And also be sure to include information on how your activities are using assets of the community. So it's not just about addressing needs or deficiencies, it's how are you leveraging the assets that are already in the community. Also, with regard to activities, if you're engaging in, you're creating a mobile market, you know, you're working with a set of growers, you have a workforce training program for youth, for culinary jobs. How did you came up with the ideas that those were important for this community because you consulted with the community. Well, now that you're laying out the activities and the things that you're going to do, make sure that those community members are engaged in those activities. It's very helpful to have a timeline, and this means in a table that shows when activities occur and who's going to do them. So if you're listing a bunch of things that people are going to be doing, which partner organization is going to be in charge of that? And the partner organization that is in charge should be the one that is best equipped and has done that before. So in sections A and B, here again we're going, you know, we're talking about how all the sections of your narrative need to fit together and be supporting each other. Is that the partners that you discussed in section B, there should be one of those partners should have the wherewithal to work with mobile market farmers and indicate specifically who at that organization, you know, even if it's a coordinator, you know, without a person's name, is going to, you know, be handling those activities. All right, so now we've kind of gone, we've talked about this, the logic model and how things need to fit together, the relationship between goals, activities, outcomes, inputs, and now we're just getting to F, because you want to already have talked about all those things before you get to your evaluation section. But I've seen in an evaluation section, it can be as short as a few sentences if you've already discussed in previous sections in a clear way how these things fit together, inputs, activities, and outcomes. It could be that in this section of the evaluation you have a table that lists the activities that you plan to do, how you're going to measure those activities. For example, we're going to do, let's say, a series of tiered cooking instructions over a 2-year period. It's going to be tiered. We have 3 tiers with beginner, then an intermediate, and then a master level. How are you going to measure who's going to be taking those classes? How are you going to measure their satisfaction in taking those classes and whether they have used that information? So if you have a set of 6 activities and you're going to measure each of those, then if you can provide that in a table, it makes it much easier for the reviewer to read. Now, one thing about evaluation section is whether or not you should have a third-party evaluator. It's nice to have someone who is outside of your project listed as, and someone who has evaluation experience as being involved with the project and to assess how the project is going, both to monitor progress, that means to see, you know, on maybe a quarterly basis or every 6 months, to take a look at your record keeping and to see how the progress of the project, and also to do that outcome evaluation, but you don't necessarily have to have a third-party evaluator. I think what can be really a nice compromise is if you have a set of partner organizations, one of those partner organizations has someone on staff who has evaluation experience. If you tag that person as being an evaluation resource, and that that person is going to be involved with the project team meeting on a quarterly basis, then that can suffice, and that can, provide good evidence that you have someone with evaluation skills on your team. All right, so at this point, I've kind of gone through really quickly about, how evaluation, how assessment can be kind of woven through all of these sections. And so let's talk for a minute about, I think we have plenty of time to talk about the sustainability section and then tips on the narrative. Is there anything in chat that we need to look at, Christopher, or should I go on to these final two things?
A couple of quick questions that we could address, perhaps. So one, to just reiterate, we will be sending out the webinar presentation slides and the recording of the webinar following this webinar, so you should see that by tomorrow afternoon. And then an additional question came through regarding where is the best place in the proposal to kind of put the full outline of your program. Yeah. And so like the full flow of what would happen in the program. And I think that would want to be in the activities section. But there's certainly a couple places in the proposal where you'll kind of talk about the overview of your project.
Right. So, I mean, you want to signal, what the, the broad outlines of your project right there in the abstract. You want to signal the broad outlines, what is the goal and what's the goal of the project. I think it's really effective in these, long narratives when, it's a 17-page narrative to put in tables to help reviewers. It's breaking up all of that text and it's also drawing out specific points. So I think the most effective things I've seen is to have activity, a table for activities, and then to have those activities arranged underneath goals or project objectives. And honestly, although in the CFP it's pieced out, you have these sections, 8 sections, is that the C, D, E, and E, those kind of, sometimes it's hard to untangle that. You want to start talking about a goal, and then you want to talk specifically about these are the activities we're going to do to try and reach that goal. And it can be okay to do that. So it can be all right if it's hard for you to piece out and to talk about the goals in one section and the activities in another and the relationship to program objectives in another. I have seen it where it's not like you will be, I have not seen anyone penalized by talking about program objectives, which says it's in section E, actually having that in section C, if it makes more sense. If it makes it confusing to try and extract these things and pick them apart and put them in separate sections, I would put it all in one section, and then in the succeeding one, you can refer back to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so, and that's a great point. There's definitely overlap in where the information will land. That's great, thank you. A couple other questions did come through. So one person asks, we are planning to do a pre- and post-program surveys to measure outcomes. Is it helpful to submit the survey instruments with the proposal?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll put those in an appendix. So what those things, that's signaling, again, that's signaling to the reviewer that you've fully thought this thing through. You have 17 pages of text, but you have unlimited amount of room in that appendix. So I would definitely add that.
Great. Yeah, agreed. And then one more question in regards to planning grants. Someone asks, we are pursuing a planning grant and I'm finding difficulty in understanding how to undertake this work, especially evaluation, if we're just in the planning stage.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that the planning grants do not have to have evaluation or self-sustainability sections.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. There's not an evaluation section required for planning grants.
Right. So I think what the planning is, the key with the planning. Okay, so when you're putting in a full CFP, the way that differs from a planning is that you've already met with the community members. It's in a sense what you're signaling to the reviewer is that you have everything wired. In other words, you have all your partners. They are the strongest partners. They're the most. They have all the skills to undertake the project that you're going to lay out. And you've met with the community more than once to talk about, what are the assets and needs, and what does the community want, and how can your organization, your partner organization, work with them to achieve, their goals. That's the whole thing about the CFP. So in a planning grant, you want to indicate that you're not starting from like total zero. You have an idea of the community that you want to work with. You have the names of some people in the community leaders. You have some other partner organizations. And so the plan, you do have to present a plan, and what that could be is that we're going to hold, instead of, 3 meetings, like 3 community meetings over this time period. They're going to each build on each other. And then at the end, we anticipate having a community needs and assets assessment and a set of, a set of partners that are going to work with us, for this specific community. I don't know if that helps at all, but.
Yeah, no, that's great. There were a couple other questions that just came through. One is, if we want our evaluation to include a participatory component, should the evaluation section focus more on how that participatory evaluation will be designed than on the specific evaluation metrics that will be used?
Mm-hmm. So you want to, I guess the thing is the person is saying they're going to use participatory evaluation. They're going to work with their community members who are going to help them devise what measures they should be using. That's how I'm reading that question. And they're not quite sure what those measures might be. Mm-hmm. So they're wondering, can we just say we're going to do participatory evaluation? I would say yes. Define what you mean by participatory evaluation and who the participants are going to be, and then give an example of the kind of measure you think you will be using. So even though it might, so that means you don't have to come up with all the measures right now, but give an indication that you've thought it through enough so that you have an idea of what one of those might be.
Mm-hmm. Great. Another question, should the program design and logic model include activities and outcomes that might not be directly funded by CFP, but may be funded by another as of yet unsecured source and are an important part of the overall project vision?
Well, if you don't have it funded yet, if you put it in activities that aren't funded yet, then a reviewer's read of that would be that your project is not really ready to go, right? It's not as if you've got everything wired, and that all you need is X, Y, and Z, which is going to be funded by the CFP grant. And if you get X, Y, and Z funded by the CFP grant, you're off. You're off, and you're going to be able to execute this project. If you have that in there, it seems to signal that, well, it might not fly unless you get this other grant. Mm-hmm. So
Yeah.
I would say no. I would have to say no to that.
That makes sense.
That would be my opinion on it. I mean, you could do that, I guess, and also I just don't want to shut that down totally, is that you could say, you could indicate clearly that if you get this other funding, you're going to do these activities, but that will just be a value add. You know, make it even bigger and better, but if your project depends on getting that and you don't have that funding, then, you know, I wouldn't have that in there, no.
Mm-hmm. Great. And one more question. If we have testimonials from current clients, would we include this in the narrative or in the appendices?
Yeah. Yes, I would have a bit of both. So, you know, you can put lots of stuff in the appendices. You don't want to load it up with just stuff that is not relevant at all. But if you have, and I'll just mention this now before I forget, if you have like a newspaper stories about your organization or partners, or you have a brochure that went to community members, anything like that, you can stick it in the narrative. So this one was, yeah, reflections from. Can you say it one more time? How you phrased it?
Testimonials from current clients.
Yeah, testimonials. So I would definitely include those in the appendix, and then draw out some key quotes and put it into the narrative. Mm-hmm. So here again, you know, when you're doing your narrative, you can have it so it's like it's a document packed with text, you know, one paragraph after the other, but I don't recommend it. You know, you could have like this quote from people you've worked with as testimonials, kind of as like pull out quotes that are in larger text that are kind of put, you know, strategically in some of the sections of your narrative, and that makes it easier to read. You know, it highlights that. I think that's really effective, very effective.
Great. And one somewhat related question, how about media coverage of the project as appendices?
Yes. Yeah, media. So newspaper, anything like that, yes. Because that's, you know, what that signals is that signaling, you know, the reviewer just has that package. You know, so reviewers, they don't go off and look at your website. They just have that package of information. So if you give them a better sense of you and your partners, you know, your partner organizations, you put that stuff in the appendix. That's very helpful.
Great. Wonderful. I think that's all the questions at the moment, so we can go ahead and move on and maybe take more questions.
All right, yeah, I think I'm much better answering questions than going through a webinar. But I'll cover a few more slides here. Yeah, y'all keep those questions coming. So I'm just going to talk about the sustainability section. So some people think that they get kind of, you know, taken aback by sustainability, thinking that the project is going to have to sustain itself through its own funding, in the sense of, you know, it's become like a business. It's going to be funded by a business. It's off on its own, but that's not that's not the case. So with sustainability, you can explain which parts of the project will continue. It may be that some parts of the project don't continue because there won't be funding, and you should say that. Just which parts of the project do you think are going to continue on their own? Maybe one of your partners is going to, your various partners are going to assume different parts of the project. They're going to adopt it so that this 2-year bulk of funding is going to rev things up and get them nice and solidified. Ideally, you're going to have it's going to put a central coordinator in place. That's a very effective use of funds, seen as a very effective use of funds. Have a central coordinator who's going to manage all these activities amongst the various partners. At the end of the time period, the coordinator goes away, but these various parts of the project are taken over by partners. That would be signaling that you have a way that the project has developed local capacity. Now you have your local partners starting to do these things. Identify other actual or potential funding. So it's totally fine to say that we are going to seek other funding once these funds end. What is better, you know, more effective, is that you're going to seek funding for some parts of the project, the ones that other partners are not going to take over. All right, but it's fine to say that, you know, we've worked with, you know, some local foundations over time, and they've funded us, and that we just need this boost of funding to get us at a level where then we can go back to these funders, and they've committed to providing a smaller amount of core funding. And if you have letters of support from those funders, well, all the better. So that is, yeah, I think that covers that pretty well. A couple of things about the narrative, just, you know, it is, like I said, 17 pages. Avoid these long paragraphs and break it up with text. Break it up with those little pull quotes from your, from people that you've worked with. Bulleted lists, tables, have color figures to illustrate your data. If you did some kind of a needs assets assessment, you know, don't have that all in text. You can have like some kind of a, you know, some color graphs. It's just to break it up, break up the text, and use those bold text, italics, and underlines judiciously. Don't, you know, don't have too many of them. White space is a better use, I think. Include an activity table and a timeline table. The activity table and timeline, you know, you can fit those things together. You can have them apart. Take activities. It's important to indicate who's doing the activities, what partner, who's going to carry it out. Timeline just gives us a nice simple timeline. It gives the reviewer a sense of, you know, how are things fitting together? How is one thing building on the next? Make sure that nothing in one section contradicts another one, especially if you've turned in a CFP one time and now you're revising it and you're turning it in again, and you made some changes in some sections. Yeah, absolutely make sure you have an outside reader to read through that thing and make sure you don't have anything that's contradictory. That is a huge red flag. Typos, stuff like that, they're just kind of, you know, they're red flags because they they're indicators of not being prepared, and you want to show that you're prepared and you're highly competent. Don't bury relevant information in the appendix. So that this is like about the testimonials or even the media coverage. You know, you can have those things in the appendix, but mention them in the narrative, and then also refer to, you know, see more in the appendix. If the project is based on establishing a business, then you need to provide a business plan. I suggest less than 5 pages in the appendix. So if you're imagining that you're going to open, you know, you have a culinary training center, there's going to be a cafe attached, and it's going to be self-sufficient. If you're saying that in your proposal, then you need to provide a business plan. Okay, and here's just I have a couple of extra pages of tips here. I won't read them all out, but I just kind of leave them on the screen. I'm going to page through and then page back. This is specific to section B. Just things that I have seen here on this slide. I say each partner supplies a unique letter of support. Letters of support are very important. If the letters of support are only from organizations that are receiving funding through the CFP, that's not so great. So the letters of support also need to be from, you know, other organizations, community leaders, community groups, local government, indicating support. They need to be unique. If they all read the same, that's a big red flag. And describe, for the letters that are from your partner organizations, have them describe exactly what they're planning to do and how they have worked with communities in the past. Again, that information is also in section B when you're supposed to lay out each of your partners and describe them. But you know, you only have so much space there, but once again, in the appendix, those letters of support, you can have as many letters as you want, and they can be as, you know, more detailed. I think that's it. Unless there's more questions for me.
Wonderful. Yeah, a few questions came through. Let me kind of go back and go in order here. So someone asking for confirmation around the 15 versus 17 pages for the narrative.
Oh,
and please confirm. So let me see if I can pull up the RFA real quick and find confirmation on that.
Yes, same here.
Let's see. So I'm seeing on Page 12 of the RFA under Field 8 Project Narrative, it's saying 15 pages.
Yeah, okay. So they made it shorter. Sorry about that. So you only have 15 pages. Okay, that's more information you need to put in the appendix.
Right.
But referencing in the narrative. Referencing in the narrative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then, yeah, further clarification, the RFA says 15 pages. So yeah, sorry about any confusion there, 15 pages for the narrative. Is it possible to include maps and other images in the narrative, or should we refer to them as part of the appendix?
No, you could put maps in there. I mean, that's like another thing where, if they're effective, it breaks up the text, and it allows, those visuals are very helpful.
Right. Great.
So anything that you could, I would say, especially in that section A where you're talking about like needs of the community, you're talking about the community, anything that you can have in a map and a table is going to be helpful. So if you have census, type data, secondary data and statistics on the community, definitely just stick that in a table.
Great. What is the difference between the activity table and timeline table?
Yeah, so some you can combine both of them. It really is, if you have so many activities, if you can piece out the activities and do it in a timeline, then you could have both in one table. What I would do is just try it, and if it's confusing and it's really hard to have the activity and timeline together, then you can do them separately. As long as you have, both sets of information in there.
Great. Given the 10-page limit of narrative plus 7 pages of tables, which I think that is actually 10 pages of narrative, 5 additional pages for figures and tables. Should all tables follow narrative of A through G? So I think that means as in section A through G, as the RFA defines the different pieces of the narrative proposal, should the tables follow the same order?
If the tables were separate from the text, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, then I would say yes.
So, yeah, great. So if no business is to be established, we don't need a business plan attachment, just paragraphs in the narrative section.
If you're not going to have if there's no, well, I mean, I think the main thing is if you're saying that you're going to create a business, then you need to have a business plan. There are some instances where a big component of the CFP has been this creation of a business. It might be like a food aggregation, like a food hubby type business, or it could be a cafe. And the way it's been written about in the narrative is that it's going to be a business, a freestanding business. And that's not convincing unless there's a business plan just in, how are you going to put this together? After you get the initial investment, what's cash flow going to look like? What are the costs and returns that you're anticipating? So that needs to be pieced out somewhere, and a short business plan is an effective way to do that.
Great. Okay. How many is a reasonable number of letters of support to include? Is there such a thing as too many?
I don't really think there's too many. However, if they all read the same, let's say, everybody used the same draft letter of support and put it on their letterhead and sign their name, that is very ineffective.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a good set of 12 letters, I would say, 8 to 12 letters, even 6 letters, it kind of depends on who they're from. If they're representative of, like say, if you have 6 letters and they're representative of 6 different sectors, one from local government, one from county, one from the hospital, you know, one from, you know, a couple from community members, and they're fairly detailed. They're all different. Then 6 can be enough.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I'll also just quickly mention the language in the RFA that they're looking for letters from key organizations involved in the project, acknowledging their support and contributions, and a limited number of additional support letters, such as those from farmers or schools where appropriate, are encouraged to provide evidence of broad community involvement. So they don't define what a limited number means, but yeah, I think broadly Rebecca's guidelines on that are great.
Yeah, I wouldn't hold back. I mean, if you have a lot of people who are supporting this, yeah, I wouldn't hold back. And even though it says that in the RFP about you want to have letters from the organizations that are part of your project, if those organizations are, you know, you want those organizations that are part of the project to be receiving some resources from the project. But if your only letters are from organizations that are receiving resources, that's not, you know, you want to have more than that. You know, more community letters.
Sure. Great. Another question, new entry provided a link to evaluation tools for food councils. Are these okay to reference as tools for evaluation so that we are not reinventing the wheel? And I'd say absolutely. I think, you know, new entry has some resources available on our website, and I think that, you know, from my standpoint is great to avoid reinventing the wheel, and if you can utilize components of these different resources, I would say by all means.
Yeah, I think so too, and I guess the thing is that, like in your, if you put that in, if that's one sentence in your narrative, and you're like, we're going to use measures as, you know, as identified and tested in this X document. Maybe you want to mention a couple of them, a couple of the measures that you're going to use, and maybe, you know, so that it's not, it doesn't look like you just like, you know, grab something off the shelf and that you haven't actually looked at that document. You know, again, you're providing evidence.
Right. Great. There are some more questions around the number of pages for appendices versus the number of pages for figures and tables. And I think what I might do is follow up with folks at NIFA just to clarify, because it sounds like there are points in the RFA where it refers to a 5-page limit for figures and tables, and then 7 pages for appendices. So I'm not sure what the difference might be, but we can certainly look into that and include that as part of the follow-up to this webinar to try to clarify.
Also, I just recall in proposals that I asked them whether, I don't think that the tables have to be separate from the text.
Okay.
I believe that it's combined. So if there's 7 of text and 5 of tables, does that just mean you have 12 pages to work with, and you can put your tables where it's most effective to have your tables, you know, right next to the text that's talking about them?
Right.
I mean, that would make the most sense. That's how I recall it being. As far as the appendices, I can understand they don't want to have pages and pages of appendices, but in my experience, it's been more than 7.
Yeah,
so, yeah, that would be good to know.
Yeah, I'll look into that and clarify and send that around to everyone with the follow-up email. Another question, can you talk about the language that refers to innovative evaluation strategies and what some examples of that might be?
Well, I think someone mentioned the participatory evaluation. I think that is most appropriate for the CFP because, you know, as USDA says, this is the one grant program they have that's intended for low-income community members to do in conjunction with a partner organization. But so participatory evaluation, how are you going to reach communities that that would be difficult to do a survey with? You know, are you going to, or maybe if you say you're going to put something out on using mobile phone technology because you're working with youth, that would be seen as being a kind of a novel evaluation technique. You could talk about developmental evaluation, which would mean that, you know, you're going to have an idea of what you're going to be looking for as far as to measure your progress and your outcomes, but that those things might change over time depending on what might change with the community and which direction they want to go in. So it can be a novelty about how you're collecting the data more than what data you're collecting.
Great. And what format is recommended for references?
Oh. Like for like an academic reference?
Yeah, I guess for the bibliography.
I don't think it matters at all. Well, whatever, you could use any format as long as it's consistent.
Right. Yeah, I would echo the same. And then there's a question about an outside evaluator. For our project, we will have to find an outside evaluator consultant, but haven't done so yet because we lack the funding. Right now, we're doing pre-post program surveys that our own staff is able to administer, but eventually want to bring in an outside person who can do more, pending a CFP grant award. What's the best way to talk about an evaluation consultant who hasn't been identified yet?
I guess I would say straight up why you don't have one yet, which is because of limited resources. Say that, and that you have identified that you'll be able to collect the data and that you're going to have an outside evaluator as an advisor. And so that's how I would do it. What the difference being that if you have an evaluator who's actually also collecting the data for you, actually also administering the surveys, et cetera, then that's going to be more costly than having an outside evaluator who's going to kind of counsel you and sort of check your survey format, and then you have someone on your team who's going to go and administer the survey and tally the results. And if you do want to have an outside evaluator who's going to also collect the data, and you're saying we haven't put that person in yet because we don't have the money, I would identify an evaluation firm and put that in there. But I think just being honest about, you don't have an outside evaluator because they're costly, but you have X amount of money put aside to bring in an outside evaluator to work with your team, that's the best way to go about it.
Great. I think that's all the questions that have come through. We can give it another minute and see if more questions come in at the end here, if anybody has any other burning inquiries. And then just one final clarification on the appendices and the page limit. As I mentioned, I'll look into that and make sure to send that around to everyone as a follow-up from this webinar when I send the recording and the resources and such. But the appendices would not include your letters of support. That would go in your other attachments.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I think
that makes sense.
Someone thought that was included in your appendices, but it is not.
So it's the other attachments that are unlimited.
Right.
That's it.
Great. So, yeah, I'm not seeing any further questions come through, but you can, if anyone has any questions that come up after the fact, you can feel free to send me a follow-up note, and I'd be happy to get back to you. And I can pull up my contact information here as well. And Rebecca, I think on this Q&A final slide, I included your email as well. Is it all right if I share that?
Oh, yeah. You want me to pass you wall here.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. So, yeah, feel free to send any questions my way. Oh, it looks like one question came in. Can linkages be made for evaluators willing to assist applicants with their narratives?
Yeah, I think that would be part of your programming, right?
Yeah, it sounds like it to me. Mm-hmm.
Is that something that's still available?
Oh, the technical assistance that New Entry provides?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, yes, that's definitely still available. You know, year-round, but certainly pertinent at this time before applications are due. So yeah, you can absolutely be in touch with us for any further technical assistance, including looking at pieces of your evaluation plan. If you want to, us or one of our technical assistance partners to take a look at that, we'd be happy to. So
could
yeah.
people like on the call, can they send in do they just contact you about, like the person who asked to have someone look over their narrative, they would contact you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can contact me. Also on our website, we have a link to a technical assistance intake form. So you're welcome to fill that out and we'll respond and get back to you and address whatever questions you have, including narrative review. So we're happy to take a look and provide any feedback about your narrative for your proposal. So yeah, absolutely. You can feel free to email me directly. Probably the easiest way. Well, great. Thank you all for taking this time. Thank you so much to Rebecca Dunning. That was wonderful to dive into evaluation and how it kind of weaves through all the different components of the CFP application and proposal. As I mentioned, you'll be receiving a follow-up email from me with the webinar recording, some resources. Feel free to reach out, and thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you.